I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is the first meeting of the Rehoboth Beach Stormwater Task Force. And before we go any further, I'd like to have us all meet the mayor, and he will welcome us. Good to hear from the mayor. Mayor Stan Mills.
Very good. Thank you, Chair Legree. Appreciate the opportunity to say hi to everybody. I was going to come around and shake everybody's hand one at a time, but if I did sanitizer between everyone, that adds 15 minutes to your meeting. So I apologize. Welcome. I'm glad you're here. I know you're all committed to doing a good job and devoting your time at this place. You're in an awesome position because you're going to make recommendations, your advisory to the mayor and commissioners, and we look forward to hearing what your recommendations are in the future. I would like to share a few thoughts is that now that you're on here, you are part of the city government. So don't complain about the city government because you are part of us. Remember, you might remember, some of you took a Freedom of Information seminar and ethics seminar back in early March. That was actually a mandatory course. If you weren't able to take it, we'll be sending out through your chair a link to the video so you can watch it on your own. Very, very important because you're not familiar with government. We're not a business. We're not a run business. We are government, and that means you have certain rules to follow. You can't meet, 8 of you can't meet at a restaurant and talk stormwater. You can't do that. And so there are certain rules we want you to follow. This is interesting seeing this many people all up here. I think the last time that happened, we had a joint meeting between planning commission members and the mayor and commissioners. So it's kind of exciting to see all new faces up here. Perhaps the chair will rotate you all for each meeting so that you all have an opportunity to sit up at top at one point or the other. It's pretty exciting. So with that, I want to thank everybody. And certainly if you have any questions, you can come to me, but come to your chair first. Anything else you want me to say? Or
No, just wish us luck.
No.
Wish us a speedy journey with the wind behind our back.
You'll do fine. If you can get this mayor to stop talking after 3 minutes, then you're doing pretty good. Thank you all.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, everybody. What I would like to do is to have a roll call by having everybody give us about 30 seconds why you're here or why you'd like what you want, what your goals are. And excuse me, Mayor, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I have one more thing. I want you all to eat this microphone as you talk. If you don't hear yourself, you're not talking loud enough. We're recording this on the video. We're recording it on the audio. If you've ever listened, by the time you stand back from the microphone, you are not able to be heard on the video. So please remember to pull this up. If down here you need to share it, then so be it. Yes, absolutely. You need to pull that up and talk about like this.
Mayor,
Yeah, at the
Yes.
table.
the tall gooseneck ones are not effective. We're using the little ones down here on the table.
These are your microphones down here, so that's why they're. Sorry to interrupt. Thank you.
And as I call roll, we'll have a chance to see how your mics are working. And this is going to be a fairly informal procedure. So if someone says, hey, I can't hear you, it'll be appropriate. So let's start with Jan. Introduce yourself, say why you'd like to be, why you're here, and why you think you should be here.
My name is Jan Conacy, and I'm a resident of Rehoboth Beach, and I'm here representing Save Our Lake Threes, and I have a very, very personal and strong interest in climate change, having our house be destroyed by a tornado a few years ago in Dover. So tornadoes are just not in Kansas. But what's happened since then, as we all know, are heavy, heavy rains that didn't happen before, really impacts of climate change. Also, I'm on the Board of Adjustment, and our last 2 cases have been about stormwater and about the implications of what happens when people change their property, even in compliance with city code, what happens to their neighbors. And so we've had the last 2 cases. So it's very current.
Thank you, Jan. Those of us who watched the last Board of Adjustment will remember exactly what she's talking about and how critical important, and how there were some decisions that hinged on that very topic. Go ahead, Frank.
Frank Cooper. I live at 96 East Lake Drive, and I am a lakefront property owner. So am very aware of what happens on Silver Lake, and I am the unofficial keeper of the weir. I'm the one that controls the lake level by default. The DNREC is supposed to do it. They stopped doing it. And so when it gets too high, I go and clean the weir out, and when it gets too low, so I'm very conscious of that lake, and that is our stormwater retention pond. And I don't think it was ever designed. I don't know what the level is, but I do know that it gets higher and higher after every rainstorm and these severe rainstorms. So at some point, we're going to be dealing with flooding issues in Rehoboth Beach, and we need to deal with that. So I'm personally very concerned about that. Bring whatever expertise I have, but I'm here as much to learn as I am anything else. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Eric Seward. I was born, raised, and educated in the state of Delaware. I've been coming to Rehoboth for quite some time. My parents owned a piece of property. I'm soon to be an owner, a resident of Rehoboth. And I think the number one thing is Rehoboth has been good to me, and I just want to give back to the town and try and make this, it's been a great town for me, and I just want to make it good for us. My experience and why I'm here is I've been in the environmental field for quite some time. I've had a short stint with DNREC. I've worked in industry, and now I work in Sussex County in industry here, and somewhat familiar with the environmental regulations around this.
Thanks, Eric. Tom Childers, who would be here, is not able to come during the month of June, and we hope that he will be able to attend later on. It just depends how things work out in June. I'm Jay LeGree. I think everybody knows me, and I'm glad to be here, and I'm just really glad that all of you are here. I mean, you folks are well qualified, and everybody has a special talent, and we're going to use it before these meetings are over. So I'm glad you're here. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. My name is Janice Miller, and I've been a property owner and part-time resident since 2004. My unit is at the Arc, which is a relatively large condo along the avenue, and I'm sure it contributes to stormwater management projects, I can't even talk today, stormwater management problems, because there is virtually no green space on the property. It was built in the 70s or 80s when we probably didn't even stop to think about stormwater issues. I am a member of the Fairfax City Council, not Fairfax County, Fairfax City, Virginia, and recently we went through a process to set up a stormwater utility. Fairfax City has been doing stormwater projects for a number of years, and we simply put 3 additional cents on the tax rate, which generated about $2.1 million a year. However, given the fact that we have a backlog of $18.5 million, at a little over $2 million a year, it became clear that we simply could not continue to add money to the tax rate. We couldn't tax people fast enough in order to deal with our problems. The virtue of setting up a utility, which took us over 2 years to reach an agreement to do so, that we can have a separate fee for all property owners, including people who are nonprofits, large commercials with properties with lots and lots of impervious surface are going to pay a higher amount than someone who owns a residential property because of the units that the stormwater breaches. So it's been a very interesting process. I think I have some knowledge and some experience with setting up a utility, what the pitfalls are, what the benefits are, and I'd be happy to share those with everyone. I appreciate being here. Thank you, Jay.
Thank you, Janice. And anyone who would like to see some more of the things that Janice has been doing can look on their website, and they have all kinds of super good projects in color, showing you what they were and what they are now. It's a great education.
Hi, Bob Suppies. I've been in Rehoboth since 1997, so I feel like I'm a little bit of a local now, since I remember when there was no working lights on Coastal Highway. I'm a business owner representative. I own the Pines, co-own, but I think I do most of the work, so, in there. So the Pines and Aqua Bar and Grill, and we're opening Drift in the old seafood shack. And I'm very excited and pleased to give back to the community on this task force and represent businesses.
Thanks, Bob. Go ahead, Bruce.
My name is Bruce Williams. I'm the president of the Newbold Square Condominium Association. We have 2.5 acres on Silver Lake. We have 400 feet of frontage. I also was an elected official in Tacoma Park, Maryland for 22 years. And more than 25 years ago, I was part of the group at the time that set up one of the first stormwater utilities in the country. And that has been recently revised in a number of significant ways. And I was also named by Governor O'Malley in 2009 to the Local Government Advisory Committee on the Chesapeake Bay, and was very active in that. I'm still involved, and it's dealing with a number of local government issues, particularly around stormwater. And so I've got a fair amount of knowledge and experience about what other municipalities in the Chesapeake Bay watershed are doing.
And Bruce was also on our utility rate working group when we were going through stormwater and
Water and sewer.
huh?
Water and sewer.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, wastewater and freshwater, and they came up with a rate, and the Board of Commissioners accepted it, and that's what we have now.
I'm Elise Burns. I'm wearing two hats. I'm representing the Rehoboth Beach Homeowners Association, and I'm also on the tree committee for the city, the Tree and Green Infrastructure Committee, where we spend a lot of time, getting the word out about the benefits of trees and the value trees bring to Rehoboth and this whole stormwater issue. My husband and I have lived in Rehoboth part-time since 1997. We own a home on Henlopen Avenue.
Thanks, Elise. Suzanne?
I'm Suzanne Good. We were second homeowners beginning in 2006. My husband and I and our then Cape Henlopen High School son, the youngest of our 4 children, moved here year-round in 2017. I would start by echoing what Elise has said. My goal, once this committee seemed inevitable, is to incentivize the planting of new trees in our town, because so many have been lost to a huge surge in new construction in the past decade, probably longer. But I will say, just in the months leading up to the final formation of this committee, I spent some time attempting to avert the need for a stormwater impact fee by raising more revenue from user fees like parking, which wasn't done in any significant way in the end, and by deferring a major project, infrastructure project, the streetscape project, for a few years. Having said that, I think my goal now, once we obviously haven't seen what sort of data set there even exists for some of these rundown cottages that haven't been reassessed in years, but is to, once we come up with an allocation that seems equitable to everyone, to ask that half of that cost, let's call it $500,000 a year, I expect it'll be closer to $1 million a year, be borne by the property owners, and the other half be, our recommendation be that it be borne by additional user fees on visitors and tourists. So that would be, my goal is sort of in making this a little more fair than some other, the water rates in this town, which are flat rates, which are so unusual for our town. So I'll put it out there, and I look forward to meeting more of you over the months ahead.
Thanks, Suzanne.
My name's Susan Stewart. I'm a full-time resident of City of Rehoboth, and we own another property in the city of Rehoboth. And I'm a financial advisor. My interest in this, and I think some of the expertise I bring is a facility with numbers and budgets. To the extent that becomes important. And I just am interested in certainly the broader issues of climate change and trees and all that. And so I'm happy to be here and thank you
Thank
for
you.
inviting me.
Mary?
Hello, I'm Mary Peck. I'm an environmental lawyer. I had a long career with Pennsylvania DEP. I'm a property owner on Oak Avenue since 2004. I'm an environmental activist, a board member of the Delaware Nature Society, and a member of Rehoboth Environment Committee.
I am Joe Vecchio. I'm a member of the Environment Committee for the city. I worked for EPA for 20 years in Office of Emergency Management and also underground storage tanks. So I have a lot of experience in groundwater pollution, surface water pollution. I also worked for FEMA as a consultant for 8 years, working in their flood insurance and flooding issues department. So I hope I can bring a lot of the knowledge that I've had over the course of my career to help in this committee.
Hi, my name is Letitia Gomez. I'm recently retired from 35 years working for the Department of the Navy, for the Naval Facilities Engineering Command, where we, for the last probably 30 some odd years, have spent time really looking at, as we have developed installations, or think of them as small towns and cities, construction, best practices, not only in terms of making sure that our projects had groundwater best practice included into construction design, but also a lot of work with the states that we have installations in, and making sure that we were abiding by whatever their environmental regulations were. And so I'm here, and also I'm a part-time resident here in Rehoboth Beach on Sussex Street, and I'm very concerned also about the climate impact that all coastal cities around the United States are going to face and are facing, and certainly some of you already mentioned some things that have happened in the recent years that I think we should all be concerned about, and so really funding well our stormwater management program for the city is very important.
Dave?
Wow. You told me this would be a heck of a committee. This is great. Before I introduce myself, because I'll forget if I don't, Amy Mendelson is with me. Amy, why don't you real quick?
Hi, I'm Amy Mendelson.
You can go to the mic, Amy. Oh, sorry about that.
Sorry, microphone. Hi, I'm Amy Mendelson. I'm a planner with AECOM. I've been with the company for about 12 and a half years. Work primarily in Sussex County. I've worked with Rehoboth in the past, several years ago, and I'm here to help Dave with, recording meeting minutes. Thank you.
Thanks, Amy.
I'm happy to.
Introduce yourself to us, tell us who you are, tell us what you'd like, where you're headed, and spend about 30 seconds.
A real pleasure to be here. Dave Athey with AECOM. At this point in my career, I'm pretty fortunate to have a good variety of work. I do a lot of public work, city engineer work, mostly places that are smaller than Rehoboth and they don't have a Kevin. I do specialize in stormwater management, surface water, have gotten into as much out of personal interest as the market in recent years, resiliency, sustainability. I assume everybody's aware that Delaware has the dubious distinction of being the lowest mean elevation of any state in the country. Unfortunately, the elected officials taking it pretty seriously. And then, of course, things like stormwater utilities. I've done water sewer rate studies, nutrient trading, and that's somewhat out of personal interest as well. Some years ago, I decided to go back and get a graduate degree, not an MBA, but an MPA, Public Administration. And I guess there are going to be about 4 or 5 of us here today. I, like several of you, have a city council background. For me, it was 10 years, 5 terms on the city council of Newark. And I really enjoy this type of work. I'm really looking forward to working with the group here. I kind of look at utilities as the intersection of technical things with public policy, with public finance, and I just find the topic extremely interesting, and I'm really pleased at the level of engagement that the people here have already expressed. So I think it's going to be great.
Thanks, Dave. Kevin?
Commissioner, I'm Kevin Williams. I'm your Director of Public Works. I've been here 4 years now, and obviously one of the things we kind of came in to do is repair some of the infrastructure here in Rehoboth Beach. We knew it had been lagging for a while. One of the things we identified fairly early on was the stormwater infrastructure and wanting a dedicated funding stream to be able to take care of some of those issues, because we have issues, across the various disciplines of infrastructure, and thought this would be an opportunity to get a dedicated funding stream for stormwater management. It came about, and I'll touch on a little bit on the Resilient Communities Partnership that the city was a participant in starting in 2019, and that led us kind of to where we are today. Ran into Dave at one of our conferences working on the RCP, and said this would be an ideal opportunity to kind of take the ball and start moving it forward with respect to developing a stormwater utility for Rehoboth.
Thanks, Kevin. While we're here, I'm Jay, this is Dave, this is Kevin, Amy. Let's all be courteous to one another. Interrupting's probably not good. Dave's gonna do the agenda and have control of our meetings. Kevin's gonna facilitate our meetings. And I'm gonna watch and see how everything goes and try to stay awake. And so I think everybody knows at this point that this is a very talented committee. And so we're gonna do good stuff. And let's go forward. Dave?
I think Kevin wanted to kind of tee it up a little bit. So.
I touched on the Resilient Community Partnership that we participated in back in 2019. So I'm just going to touch on a couple of items to kind of so you know how we got to where we are. But we have a pretty full agenda, so I'm going to breeze through some of these very quickly. Many of you were around back when this was going on, and we're at board meetings where we talked about it. But basically, with DENREC's guidance and assistance, as well as some other funding streams, we put together the Association of Coastal Towns got together and participated in this partnership, got a grant from DENREC to do the work. But it basically was looking at the challenges that face coastal communities like our own. So you've got, as many have said already, increased severity or intensity of rainstorms, aged infrastructure that is overloaded and overworked, and development going on in the surrounding area like nobody's business, right? So looking at those kind of things and what could we as the coastal towns come together with and see things that we could use going forward to help with these types of challenges. Just a quick shot on who some of our stakeholders was. We had two consultant firms working with us, AECOM and KCI, broken apart a little bit mainly because of funding constraints under the grant program, but each had separate pieces to provide. They came up with three basic outputs of the program. You can see those there. One, a list of best management practices, which was kind of covered all 7 of the communities, and then there's a matrix that followed on with that kind of showed, okay, here's the ones that would be applicable to Rehoboth, here's some that are applicable only in other places, but a great resource for us as we go forward and look to ways to implement these best management practices to help with the challenges that we face. One of the other big components was this GIS layer of data from some recent overflights that the University of Delaware had access to. We were able to get to that through this partnership, and that's really the driving reason why we decided to act on this, was because we got that data for free, and that would have cost us a lot of money to get that kind of data in a format that we could use. So Dave worked with the university point of contact extensively, got it down to us, so now we can use that, should we go that way, to look at where we have impervious and pervious surfaces. and then a community toolkit where he looked at those various best management practices and how they could best be implemented in each of the 7 communities. I think Dave worked on the best management practices guide, the typical things they looked at, all these kind of things that you're probably well familiar with. And then there's just a snapshot of the report on what we got through the data collection, the GIS data that we were able to get, and the various sources. Kind of gave us a over-assessment of, certainly for Rehoboth and Henlopen and Acres combined, about a 3% increase in impervious area, over the last 10 or 12 years. And you can kind of see the numbers there. But it showed, and we're pretty well built out, so it wasn't like we were paving over, football fields and the like. We were pretty built out, and we still had an increase of about 3% over that period of time. And that, I think, plays to someone's comment about, what used to be the 2-bedroom bungalow is now the 5-bedroom bed and breakfast. KCI worked on this toolkit, and it's too small for you to see, but it's got the matrix of various types of stormwater management devices, protection devices, and like, and then various communities and which ones would be applicable to which ones. So that got us to where we were today, and we realized that with that, because of that data that we were able to get from those sources, that we'd be foolish not to go ahead and take it the next step. So that's when we got together and said, okay, let's move this forward and start seeing if the city wants to come up with this stormwater utility. So we decided to work on the feasibility study first, this is a part of it, but we went to DENREC, got a grant to pay for half of it. We hired AECOM to come down and do it, and basically taking the data we got from the Resilient Communities Partnership and then put it into a feasibility study for us to use should we decide to enact a stormwater utility. And a big piece of that, obviously, is the stakeholder input. So we got a lot of the data collection on costs and associated projects that we need to do here. And now we're reaching out to the community to try to get some decisions or recommendations to make to the board on how to implement the various pieces of the stormwater utility.
Kevin, I can't see that from this. Are you going to provide that material to all of us?
Sure, this will get posted on the site. If you want copies of the various products, they were posted back in the day when we did the partnership grant, but if anybody wants a copy of the products, just let me know and I can email that out.
Post that all up, because
Sure.
that would give us some background material.
Okay,
Thank you.
can do. And that's about where we are today. So we're going to look at all these different things, and Dave's going to take us through it. He will be kind of leading the charge, as I say, to kind of get us through the agenda. It's a very full agenda for today, as he covers a whole lot of background information and some of the options to us out there. So we'll get through that, and we'll really get into the meat of making decisions or to make recommendations in the upcoming meetings. And with that, Dave, I'll turn it over to you.
We're going to get these presentations to you within a day or so, and the next meeting we'll have these before you get here, so you'll be able to go through it and see what's coming before you get the big surprise. And I apologize for you not having these documents in front of you.
This one's on there.
That was included. This one we have, but that other one sounds like would be important for us to have.
Were those handed out on?
Is there a stack?
How many have those documents?
I don't.
We have this one,
This
but
was
not the other one.
posted with the agenda.
Yeah.
Well, I printed these myself, but the other documents we have not been given.
That was the RPC, that is on the web now from those meetings where, what time frame were they? In
August of 2019, I think.
August of 2019, so you could just go look on the calendar.
We'll hang them again so everybody can take a look at them.
You shouldn't have to go back and dig them out.
That's easy enough.
We'll get them for you.
Okay, well, again, it really is a pleasure to be here. Jay, Kevin, and I had a call last week. I guess we kind of decided, if you have a question partway through this, why don't you go ahead and ask it? We'll keep track of the time. As Kevin said, there's a great deal to cover, but it's all pretty valuable background information. If we kind of get bogged down, we might kind of hold questions a little bit, but I'm going to say go ahead, and if I say something or bring, go ahead and ask away, and that's probably the best way to handle it. But the intent will really be to keep this at a pretty high level today. So what I wanted to go over is just a real quick summary. What are some of the things that the city is spending money on in the field of stormwater? What are some of those options for funding the programs? A very quick overview of stormwater utilities, and then at least laid out, working with Kevin. We thought about 6 meetings of the committee would be about right. If that turns into 8, it turns into 8. If we're done at 3, that's great too. But we kind of thought 6 would be a good pace, and we can certainly modify that as we move forward. So to just draw, I always like to start my presentations on this topic with this. Rain, of course, is natural. What we're actually talking about is stormwater. Stormwater is man-made, and stormwater has a lot of impacts. The picture on the upper left, I took that probably 20 years ago, was one of my favorites. Shows a very eroded stream flowing into one that's very clear, and that, in essence, is kind of why we're here and why we're doing a lot of this stuff. Then the other two are pretty self-explanatory of just stormwater can have a lot of impacts. Can overwhelm the built infrastructure, it can cause drainage problems, it can damage both public and private property, often carries pollutants, can increase water treatment costs, and just has multiple issues can be associated with it. So this sounds really simple, but it can actually, it's good to have the conversation. What exactly do we mean by stormwater? When it rains, one of 3 things is going to happen. Either the rain is going to soak into the ground and become groundwater, it's going to evaporate and it becomes atmospheric, or it's going to run off, stormwater runoff. And we're here, of course, talking about the third, stormwater runoff. And the other distinction I always like to draw is there's really 2 fields. They, of course, overlap, but they're also somewhat different. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit more in a moment. Stormwater quantity and stormwater quality. Stormwater quantity, of course, how much is the stormwater, and stormwater quality is more what is in the stormwater. Again, related, but also somewhat separate in the way you manage it. And kind of back to me in the public finance, the public policy kind of stuff, I really find it interesting the way stormwater is almost being monetized at this point. Maybe not so much in this neck of the woods, but if you go out to like in Arizona or the desert Southwest, where they are getting into recycling what's called the gray water, where toilets aren't necessarily being flushed by potable water; they're being flushed by partially treated water because it's a scarce resource. And it's not just, I even read not too long ago where I think Alabama, Georgia, and Florida are fighting over water rights as well. I just find the whole topic extremely interesting. Probably not going to happen in my career, but I think sooner or later, those types of discussions are going to happen in the Mid-Atlantic, in Delaware perhaps, because water is a finite resource. It's a scarce resource like every other resource. So the stormwater quantity, as I said a moment ago, that really gets into the rate of stormwater and its volume. And the way it's typically managed, detention basins, you've probably seen them all, newer shopping centers, oftentimes just frankly kind of an ugly hole in the ground, but they are functional, they do their job. This is the stormwater pipes, this is the stormwater inlets, things of that nature that you often see to convey and manage the stormwater. But there is, and I heard multiple people, I was taking notes, whole climate change, sea level rise, I think it's an almost certainty that storms will be getting more severe. They're going to get more frequent, and not just Rehoboth, everybody's going to have to figure out a way to deal with it and cope with it. The stormwater quality, that gets more into the composition of the stormwater and what's in it, concentrations. And this, because stormwater often originates, more often unlike private property, gets into a multifaceted way of managing it. And this is where you start getting into like public education, public outreach, working. I know DelDOT has a program something like Smart Lawns. I don't think that's the exact name of it, but something similar where they can actually certify landscapers to be using the greenest practices possible, not over-fertilizing, things of that nature. So again, the stormwater quality necessitates a very broad approach, and you get into what are called BMPs, best management practices, and the other acronym I'll throw at you, and I'm going to give some examples in a moment, is the NIPD's MS4 program. So why don't I leave it there, and I'm sorry, I guess there's one slide before that. So I'm spending a fair amount of time, maybe I should divert here real quick. And Kevin, feel free to chime in. This gets a little bit confusing. I mentioned this permitting program a moment ago. Rehoboth Beach currently is not subject to this program. A lot of other places, the whole county of Newcastle is in it. The Dover area, Deldots Road, kind of the Route 13 corridor, Middletown, Newark. But because of the way the regulations are written, they don't necessarily look at Rehoboth's summertime population. They look at its year-round population, and believe it or not, you're still kind of falling under the threshold. DENREC, frankly, has wanted to do something about this for quite some time, bring Lewis into the program, the whole coastal highway corridor, but they haven't done it yet. And I believe, Kevin, if I'm misstating your intentions, please clarify it, but I believe Kevin's position is, even though Rehoboth is not regulated yet, it's only a matter of time, so you might as well kind of start getting yourselves as if you had that program to contend with. Is that reasonably accurate?
Yeah, I think so. I told Dave that we want to act like we're regulated without being regulated. So we're going to do what we would have to do were we to be regulated, but we're going to do it without being told to do it because it's the right thing to do. It's kind of our philosophy.
Yes, sir.
So, yeah, I agree with you for what we want to do here, but are those, the Newcastle ones, the ones that you mentioned, they went together, right? So were they all together in this plan? So is there thoughts for the town of Rehoboth to bring in some partners to go in with this, like Newcastle did?
Yes, the county actually came and tried to convince many of the communities to kind of go together and do it countywide. I think our position was that we, Rehoboth, have more resources than most other communities in the county, and we would probably be better off going it alone rather than kind of developing it and then sharing that resource across the county. And that, in fact, we wanted to actually do more than what I think we'd be required to do with the MS4 permit. So right now, they've only gone to individual communities in Sussex County, and they picked up 6 or 8, I think, on this last go-round.
So I didn't know if we were all going to eventually go back in together, reform, or are we looking to do this ourselves?
That's an option right now. We're working on our own.
Okay.
May I actually, I don't, that becomes actually a very complex answer. There's another layer to it. That the permits are based, I referenced a moment ago how Rehoboth kind of falls under a threshold. The urbanized area, which is something the U.S. Census Bureau designates, as the name would imply, more dense areas. And that's why, to answer your question, it sounds like you already kind of know the answer, that Newcastle County, it's a county-wide permit, and DelDOT is they're called the principal permittees, the county and DelDOT. They share the permit. There are also 6 municipalities, if I recall correctly, that were called co-permittees: Ellesmere, Newcastle, Delaware City. Middletown has their own. Newark has their own. Can't believe I'm drawing a blank on that.
But they're
Newport,
all in Newcastle County.
they're all in Newcastle County. They're all very heavily urbanized, not heavily populated, but already very urbanized. Whereas Sussex County, of course, is not anywhere near as densely populated as Newcastle. So I frankly don't really see the county-wide thing ever happening, but I believe what Kevin was talking about, as my understanding, it is in the works of multiple municipalities kind of banding together because their economies of scale to be met and things of that nature.
It just sounded like we're looking to go that way, but I didn't see it.
Yes.
I just had a question about your common pollutants, that slide that's up there.
Okay.
You mentioned earlier, and we all know probably, that Silver Lake essentially is our retention pond.
Right.
But I've never seen any data that indicates what the level of pollutants are, what the quality of the water is. I know I used to live on Moores Lake, and DENREC tested the lakes a lot. but are those lakes tested? Do we know what's in it now, what they're, you know?
Yeah,
And then what goal we're going towards to?
correct. I would just ask us, that's being managed under the Lakes Management Plan that the Corps is working on for us. You know, we're partnered with Dewey, Sussex County, us, and the state on that exact thing.
But we haven't been able to get any data about it.
Correct, because they haven't really been doing any testing, is what we're finding out. They had some testing done several years ago, but really nothing recently.
So how will we know if we, you know, are cleaning up stormwater? How will we know what the lake was like before and what it's like after?
That if we have that data, it'll be in that Lakes Management Plan, so it'll give us that data to use.
So are they subject to FOIA? I mean, I don't understand why we don't know what's going on with the Lakes Management Plan.
No, I can't help you with that. I mean, they're working on the plan, is all
Who
I'm
is
saying.
they?
The Corps of Engineers.
And the city and the state?
And the city and the county and Dewey, because we all have a piece of the lake frontage. And the state, because they own the water part of the.
Right, that's what I'm just, you know, I haven't been able to get any data about it, and I don't see how we can do things without data. Okay, thank you.
Jan was on the Planning Commission when they did the 2010-2012 study of Silver Lake, which is online. And if anybody really wants to read about Silver Lake, you'll find it there.
I also have a copy of it. I can mail it to everybody if they want it.
And I also have the file if you want. But it's an eye-opening and really informative study they did, and I recommend it to everybody to go through it. Thank you.
Yeah, please share.
Okay, I will. I'll just send it to everyone. You can look at it or not look at it.
So this is just a general list, the common pollutants you'll find in stormwater, the bacteria, those are pretty widely known of the issues you all are dealing with in Rehoboth, the ocean outfalls. Nutrients is kind of what's driving a lot of the permits, and I guess the acronym I haven't tossed out yet is the TMDLs, total maximum daily loads, where it's a plan preparation process to be putting in various BMP structural measures to try to manage some of the pollutants. In Delaware, those by and large are based on the nutrients, which is a summary term for nitrogen and phosphorus. Siltation, suspended solids, that's really important for two reasons. Back to the earlier picture where you showed the very eroded stream flowing into the new stream. It's not only the visual, the dirt, frankly, in the stream, but the chemicals like nutrients, things like that, have a tendency to bind. They grab hold, and this, of course, on a very micro level, to the sediment, and it becomes a transport mechanism as well. So it is not only causes filtration problems for water plants and such, but it carries the pollution as well. Organics, low dissolved oxygen, pesticides, pathogens. I don't know if the PCBs are prominent. That's again a kind of a Christina River thing. There's a lot of effort being put forth on some PCBs in Newcastle County. So you'll hear reference now and then to the MS4, the Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System. That is, in a nutshell, pretty much anything that conveys stormwater. It can be the pipes, it can be the inlets, it can be an open channel, and a lot of this falls down to, most of it ultimately boils down to what's going on at the outfall. That's why you see the guy doing some sampling there, and I know that's something that Rehoboth also does. But that's the MS4 is becoming a very common term. I mentioned BMPs a few minutes ago. This gets also a little bit confusing. DENREC has, some of you I'm sure are probably aware of it, their BMP manual, best management practices, and those are really structural measures. The picture on the upper left that's actually only a couple months old, was a kind of a cascading outfall that I designed within about a year or so back. The others, and again, I'm sure you all have seen them, the ponds, the infiltration chambers, the bioretention areas, things of that nature that are becoming fairly ubiquitous now. But BMPs are also used in some of the permits I was talking about, and they use the same term, best management practice, which doesn't necessarily mean a structural measure. It can also mean a programmatic measure. People taking water samples in a stream, Anybody who's been past an active construction site has certainly seen the silt fence that usually goes up. There are other measures, construction entrances, sediment traps, things of that nature. So street sweeper on the upper right. Mapping is a very, very important thing being done. Obviously, you can't manage what you don't know, what you have. Even containment inside of garages to contain spills, things of that nature. So to kind of wrap up the water quality side of this, I just thought again, what Kevin said a moment ago is he's kind of treating or managing things as though there was a permit. It has what are commonly called the 6 minimum controls. Public education and outreach, public involvement, those two are there is a distinction. Public education is just involving your public in decisions, like, task force, public meetings, things of that nature. Distributing educational materials in flyers, activities like that, whereas public participation is actually getting the public involved, participating, stream cleanups, community cleanups, things of that nature. The IDD&E program, illicit discharge detection and elimination, is a fancy way to say keep what isn't stormwater out of your storm system. You want to make sure people aren't dumping motor oil down storm drains. You want to make sure there's not a inadvertent cross connect where they have a sanitary lateral that they meant to connect into the sewer, but they connected into the storm sewer accidentally. There are different ways to do these programs. Stormwater management during construction, pretty self-explanatory. Keep all the silt, keep all the sediment on the construction site. And then post-construction stormwater, again, the infiltration areas, the ponds, things of that nature that you see to manage the stormwater. And then good housekeeping, managing your own house, quite frankly. Are the public works yard, are salt piles contained properly, or are drip pans put under trucks when oil's changed, things of that nature. And then this was actually I did this for Newcastle County and DelDOT, the Stormwater Pollution Prevention and Management Plan was actually the blueprint, if you will, for how those two entities and the 6 municipalities intended to comply with the permit. Is very detailed. We will do this. How those programs got laid out. So again, even though that permit isn't on your doorstep right this second, as Kevin said, it quite frankly really is the right thing to do. I don't want to diminish the intricacies involved, but I don't think it's a super onerous project or process. It's really just a matter of a lot of paperwork and keeping track of what you're doing, and maybe changing some operations here and there. So to get a little bit more now into the weeds, I've worked with Kevin on and off. Actually, we started working on this about 2 years ago. We were kind of joking a moment ago. We're actually in this room. There was a meeting with folks in the city of Newark, actually where I live, that has a stormwater utility, and this was literally the week before the pandemic hit. So we got a little sidetracked with that, of course. But anyway, over the last couple of years with Kevin, as well as Evan Miller, I assume all know Evan, or he's I believe he works in the city manager's office, correct? Really looked very closely at the municipal operations, and I will give you significantly more information about this at later meetings. Again, we wanted to keep this one, really kind of up there. But determined there are about 33 employees currently working on stormwater in the city in one fashion or another, as little as about 5% of their time to as much as about 25%. Just the routine maintenance of the inlets and pipes, the street sweeping, the trash pickup, sediment removal from some of the water quality devices, things of that nature. And there are also 30 vehicles or pieces of equipment that are involved in a lot of the same activities. You have the street sweepers, you have the vacuum trucks, the beach rakes, and again, I'll certainly show this at a later time period, but we literally looked at each one of those, what its cost was, what its salvage value is, what its, therefore what its annual service life, what its annual cost would be, and then what kind of how much of its time does it spend really on stormwater, and really trying to isolate those stormwater related costs. The city does award multiple contracts each year. The major repairs are contracted. I think minor repairs the city handles with their own people. The stormwater sampling that's being done, There's a lot of outfall inspections and repairs, the GIS updates. Does everybody know what a GIS system is? So a GIS system, maybe I'll give a graphical example at the next meeting. It's a extremely powerful tool that kind of merges databases with mapping. It enables, and I think Kevin, maybe your last picture was a GIS base where we showed like the impervious surface. But it's frankly, this type of a project basically isn't possible without that sort of a GIS tool. So computerized mapping that has a database behind it. And again, maybe we'll kind of give some examples next meeting. But I know the city, in fact, most cities, very complex program to run on your own. So most cities kind of contract out very specialized work. And a lot of things the city would like to be spending money on, but currently isn't. The public outreach and education that, again, if I remember my few slides ago, was straight out of this NIPD's permit. The inventory and inspection, the mapping, I think Kevin's probably got a pretty good handle on everything in the city, but I think some digitizing could be done on that, maybe filling in a few missing gaps. Dry weather screening, that's part of this, the ID-D&E program I mentioned a moment ago. That's one of the best ways to find out if you have something in your storm system that shouldn't be there. You go out there on a dry day, and if there's green water coming out of it, you've got a problem, and then you can sample it and try to identify what that source is and get rid of that illicit connection. The BMP inspections, there are some of these BMPs, infiltration basins and bioretention and things of that nature in the city. They work great when they're first installed, but just like anything, over time, they're going to stop working. So at the very least, I've seen cities go anywhere from annually to maybe every other year, certainly no more than every third year. Things like that ought to be inspected. Employee training, some of the examples I gave earlier, when the guys are changing oil, are there drip pans under the truck? Are there procedures laid out? The misutility markouts, that's really not a permitting thing. Misutility is, you may see construction sites, they always call misutility. It's a underground utility locating service. Last thing you want to do when you're digging is to hit a gas main or hit an electrical bank or anything like that. It can really be dangerous, let alone disruptive. More storm pipe repairs. I think everybody, regardless of where you come from, it seems like there's never really enough money to keep up with the infrastructure. Very common problem. And there may be, kind of segueing back maybe a little bit now to the permitting thing, additional water quality BMPs may need to be placed at some point. Back to the example about Silver Lake and things of that nature. If the water quality is a problem, there are ways to address it. But of course, these things, they cost money. Yes, ma'am.
So hearing you're saying that there's 33 people that have various responsibilities, it occurred to me, is there anybody that's sort of the stormwater person that would direct it all? And just from a practical standpoint, if something goes wrong with a storm drain somewhere, or a lot of times they get clogged or whatnot, who is keeping track? Is it just sort of as it pops up, we deal with it, or is it more organized than that?
So we have a routine procedure for the stormwater inlet cleaning and inspection. So the streets department manages those, same guys as the trash and the beach guys. They manage that. The underground work, because they don't have the equipment in order to do that, is kind of handled by our wastewater department. So if it's an underground issue with a pipe or whatever, then we go to the wastewater department and or water, because they have some excavation equipment to go in and do that work. But the video, cleaning and video program, which we've had for the last 3 years, we're probably 75–80% through all of the city's stormwater pipes. So that's been a big boon to us to identify where we have some issues. But more than anything else, just to clean them out. I mean, you know how many roots we get here in Rehoboth because your sewer gets backed up. Well, the same thing happens to the storm sewer. So I think a lot of the issues that we've had with isolated flooding over the years, some of that's due to the fact that the pipes were clogged. So we're getting all that cleared out now. So one person is me, right? Because each of those guys kind of works for me, right? So and then we kind of farm it out based upon what the task at hand is.
I think this is just my observation, but every time we have a big storm, there's always issues with drains being clogged, and it seems to me that we do have a lot of lot of problems.
Yes, we have a lot of system that is undersized. It was built, 50, 60 years ago. The main artery down Bayard Avenue, which drains all of, South Rehoboth for the most part, is undersized just because there's so much more intense storms now. It was designed for some level of storm back in the day. And now we have a whole lot more pervious surfaces. So it's just not large enough to handle that. We attack some of the isolated ones, by enlarging inlets and those kind of things, but that's a Band-Aid. I mean, it's really the backbone of the system is that main pipe, and if that thing's clogged or broken or too small, then that's a major effort to do that work.
Thank you. Annual costs, current annual costs relating to stormwater.
Wow, a great question. If I could, I'll hold that question and come back to you with it. We do an annual stormwater brief to the board and commissioners, typically in the fall. It's in the October timeframe. We've done each of the last 2 years. It had a total of stormwater kind of costs that we'd spent in each of those years, and I'll get that for you.
And while I have the floor, on page 17 and 18, we're looking at future services and capital projects. Is there budgets available for those type of expenditures?
Right now, no, which is one of the reasons we decided we really wanted to pursue, a dedicated funding stream for stormwater projects. You start looking at, each year we put in for small isolated projects, inlet here, inlet there, maybe a new whatever, the cleaning and videoing, that kind of thing. But if we get into having to enlarge in the Bayard Avenue storm sewer, you can imagine what that's going to cost, right? To go from Silver Lake all the way to almost Rehoboth Avenue, digging up a state-owned Bayard Avenue, and then restoring it to the standard that DelDOT would require us to store it to. Those are major expenditures. And Dave and I and Evan went through all those. We've got them in the 5-year CIP, which you can see what they do to a particular year's CIP when you put a multi-million-dollar project in for a storm sewer upgrade. So he'll show you that when we get to that matrix of all these various projects that we've identified out through 5 or 6 years. 5 years we went out with the CIP. Sure. Mm-hmm.
Bruce?
I heard you say that you've been doing the cleaning and inspecting for 3 years. What I didn't catch was whether you said it's a 3-year cycle and you're ready to do it again, or whether it's longer than 3 years.
So we should have, I think that we'll have enough in this year's budget to finish all of the city's stormwater pipes. It's a little trade-off because we're trying to do, we do the sanitary and we do the storm. We get the one bucket of money and then we figure out where we most want to go. But we're winding both of those down. We're a year, probably, and at 2 most, of having done everything in the city, sanitary and storm. So at that point in time, and we're trying some other things. We did some root control stuff this year, so we'll go back in with a camera and see if that's working. But then we'll have to figure out what that return rate is when we want to go back and do it again. Some places need it more often than others. Look where the trees are. I'll give you a good indication of where we got to go with, the cleaning. Mm-hmm.
Bruce, Kevin's talking about assessment, inspections, and cleanings. He was not talking about capital improvement projects that we have. So those are above and beyond that. And he'll show that when he shows the matrix with the planned capital improvement projects that we now have.
And we've been delaying, just so you know, the commissioner knows, but we've been pushing it in the 5-year CIP for the last 2 years probably, waiting for this to see whether or not we're going to get a dedicated funding stream. Do we want to take $1.5 million out of the general fund to go do a portion of Bayard Avenue? Maybe not. So let's see if this comes to fruition, then we would probably start developing the bucket of money and then start doing the larger projects. If the decision is no, then we will have to get it into the general fund and start attacking them.
Yeah, Kevin, maybe this is a question for either you or Dave. So earlier you said that we were going it alone instead of partnering like with the county. But do we have any information of how Rehoboth Beach is impacted by runoff from our surrounds, because all the development that's outside of our city limit?
I don't personally. We'd probably be hard pressed to see, well, it's going to get to the canal and that
Right.
not go any farther, right? The places we know are impacted, Silver Lake, obviously, because we have the other entities that drain
Right.
to the lake. We haven't looked at the canal itself, right? They're going to, I think Senator Carper got money in to dredge it this year, so maybe there'll be a little more renewed interest in the water quality in the canal. And it does also drain, some of our stormwater drains to the canal. So it will be part of the discussion. I don't know that we'll really do much there, you know, in all honesty. But I don't think anything else really can get to us.
Okay.
Because of the canal.
I'm just curious because, you know, it all has to flow, right?
Yeah, right, absolutely.
And we're low. So
Absolutely.
if we sit, you know, if our elevation is lower, then it's all going to flow.
It all goes to Frank's house, right?
Yeah, I had a question related to Letitia's, what is who actually is responsible for the outfall from Silver Lake to the ocean, which seems at times to be at maximum capacity now, and certainly would need to be increased at some point.
Yeah, and that's a great topic of discussion, Frank, and we've been wrestling with that, you know, during the Lakes Management Plan. Our position is it's DENREC, and it's not us.
Right.
It's not in our footprint, it's not in the city limits. And we've been told DENREC got called in and they passed it off to DelDOT to manage that lake level, right? Because they put the weir in, it gets too high, it floods your basement or somebody's basement over near the commissioner, right? We get the calls, hey, you're flooding the basement. So they lift the weir out, all of a sudden it's dry up at the western.
The weir's gone.
edge.
I mean, that.
Correct.
I mean, that doesn't even work anymore.
Correct. The whole end has been ripped off, so you can't slide the weir down.
No,
All you can control is how much debris.
I use
you
bales
put
of
against
hay
it.
and the sediment and
Right.
the stuff that floats into it is the current method. And
So we're pretty confident that it's a DENREC owned and operated structure.
right.
And I think they've gone with that because they've actually talked to us about who we're using and how we're doing our pipe cleaning, because they're pretty confident that thing hadn't been touched in however many years. And they've got some sinkholes out there that they suspect are the sand collapsing into the pipe and flowing out one way or the other.
So at some point, we need to determine how much the volume going into the lake is going to be within the next X number of years, and whether this is.
It's going to be just enough to not flood the basements and keep
worried
water
about
at the other
I mean,
end.
the basement flooding is really not the issue here. It's flooding the entire neighborhood. I mean, it's all that area of South Delaware, of South Rehoboth is in a floodplain, and we're barely above it. And so it just seems to me that at some point we're going to have some serious flooding problems if that isn't dealt with, you know.
One of the reasons for the plan.
Right,
the
and
management
for
plan,
doing
for
this.
sure.
And I'm hoping that part of this process will be determining the overall volume, not just from the city of Rehoboth, but from outlying areas.
Correct, and have to establish what that elevation is. And that's what we're asking them to do, part of that study.
Who at DENREC is on the Lakes Management Plan?
So our point of contact has been Terry Deputy, if you know Terry.
Letitia, GHD did a study in 2018. It was finished. The author was Letitia. No, the author was
Lita.
Lita Bennett, and it's a great study. I'll send you that, and that tells about Lake Gerard. There's a weir at Lake Gerard, and it empties out into the ocean. DENREC wanted us to study the outflows that flow into our boardwalk out into the ocean. We have 5 of them, and in addition, there's some loose drainage over on north of that. But anyway, that's a great study, and there's a map in there that tells where every one of our outflow drains are, including, I think there are like 3 or 4. We don't have many on the canal, maybe a few, but it tells where they all are. And in addition to the study that the Planning Commission did back in 2012, you can get a really good idea of where all this water comes from, flows into our 2 lakes, and a little bit in the canal and out. And I'll get that to you.
Okay, can I just ask you a process? Should we send these documents to Ann, and then Ann sends them out, or when I send them to everybody, should I just include Ann so she can post them on our site?
Do you want to
Way
handle
a
that,
way of
Kevin?
doing it,
Sure.
right?
And I'll ask for somebody's help on what the rules are. I think in the Stormwater Utility Group, we actually created a OneDrive where the task force could share documents and stuff.
That's
that weren't
great.
part of that. I don't know if that takes the place of being hung on the web or you got to do them both, but it certainly makes it a lot easier to get in and manipulate that. And our IT department was able to set that up to use for that.
And we have a
Any
link to that.
documents that you're proposing to show at this meeting or future meetings, I will need to have for the record.
Does that include things like Tacoma Park had a plan? We said, oh, that'd be good for everybody to read that. We're not going to present it at the meeting, but do we have to then post that as well? I talk in terms of like homework assignments, right? We send stuff out that's just good background information, not that we're planning to present anything on that, but more of a general information for the group.
If you could just copy me on everything and then I could disseminate
Okay.
what actually needs to go
Okay.
into the record.
Perfect. We'll do it that way then. I'll get IT to set it up. Y'all have emails. You can kind of get into it and we can share things there. And then I'll work with Ann to see which of those need to get posted prior to the meetings.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Kevin, we may be getting to this. You can just tell me to be quiet if you want to. But I'm just trying to get a picture of the scope. So, you know, one part of it is the MPDS permit. If we're shooting for the home run, which is good, you know, that's what we want to do. We want to be doing things the right way, above and beyond, and beat to the regulators before they put regulations in place for us, right? So do that. So there's that part of it, but then there's the expenditures and the fixtures of the existing system. So is that everything of this task force or to look at, or are we just looking at what we're going to go after? But it sounds like it's both,
So I think, and Dave could probably weigh in as well. So the idea of this group is to say, okay, let's assume everybody's going to say, yeah, we ought to have one in Rehoboth, right? We wouldn't be here today if the commissioners and everybody didn't think this is the right thing to do. So we're going to come up with, all right, how do we implement that, right? We're going to say, okay, what are we going to use as our criterion? I'm stealing some of Dave's thunder. He's going to go tell you what Lewis did. He's going to tell you what Dover did. He's going to tell you what Newark did. So Lewis kind of went through the whole process and then punted. Said, why are we just going to charge everybody $5 a month? Okay? So there wasn't any real analysis. I mean, he did the analysis and then just punted. Whereas we're hoping that we come up with, you know, criteria that we're going to use. And if it's lot cover, if it's impervious versus pervious lot coverage, and based upon that percentage, are we going to assign a fee based on that percentage of pervious and impervious area? That's a way to go. He's got several that he's going to talk us through. So I think this group would come up with, yep, we're going to do this. We're going to recommend to the board that we move forward with this. And here's what we recommend we use as our criteria. We want to use impervious surface area because we think that's fair. Or we don't want to do it because we don't think it's fair. But that's what I want this group to be able to do, is come up with, yep, we're going to do it. Here's the criteria we're going to use. Here's the things we're going to have that help mitigate it. So if you're a homeowner and you've got X, you're going to get a $10 a month fee. There are certain things you can come back to the city and say, well, I'm going to do rain barrels, or I'm going to tear up my driveway and put impervious stuff or pervious stuff down. Then you'll get, we're going to be able to, yeah, re-index your property to the new rate. So that's kind of where where I think we want to go.
But is that price also going to be to
fix all our stuff?
Yeah.
Yes, because in that matrix of where we've developed the cost we need to raise, all those projects are in there.
Okay, so I'm sure it's coming.
So it takes that into consideration, but we want to have the policy guidance from here to the board that says, yep, we want to do it. We want to implement it this way. We're going to include, in this case, you know, state properties. We're going to try to put a fee on the state properties. We're going to charge the city. We're going to charge the city for our properties. Those kind of things, the policy things, what we want this group to make the recommendation to the board on how we implement the program, assuming we want to go forward with the program.
Question, should we fall under the purview of state regulations? Do they have specific criteria on this sort of thing that we should be meeting just so that we don't have to redo it?
Yes, they do, and if that's part of that negotiation of that plan that you would have to prepare once you're regulated. So if they were to say, yep, Rehoboth, you're going to be under phase 3 of this thing, whatever the next phase. Yeah, whatever the next iteration of phase 2, I guess.
2C,
is.
I think, at this point. so.
Right. Then we'd say, okay, and then we would negotiate with them, say, here's what we're doing, here's what we should do, and we'll develop this plan that they would then bless. And then we would have to abide by that plan going forward. I'm told by everyone I've talked to at both DENREC and, consulting business, we already do more than a state regulator was going to require us to do because we're Rehoboth, right? We want to do what's right, and we treasure these resources that we have. So for us to say, well, I'm not going to do that. I mean, no one in this room lets me do that, right? If I say, well, I don't want to do that because it costs too much or it's not really that important, those 7 guys or 7 guys and gals that sit on that dais most of the time, they're going, no, we're going to do it.
No,
And they
I was just
allocate
concerned
the
when
resources to do it.
when you were talking about how you determine what properties are billed what and stuff. That is not something that the state's going to look at or does not currently have
No,
specific criteria.
Correct. I don't think they care how you come up with the money you need to fix things and do
Okay,
things.
so anything we do is our decision to make, and then.
I think so.
More or less. The state does have, actually, there are a few comments I wanted to follow up on here, so I guess I'll go in reverse order. The state, their sediment and stormwater regulations do have a section on stormwater utilities. It is brief. It is nowhere near as detailed to the conversations that we are going to have. It does mention it needs to be an equitable system. It does mention there needs to be a direct correlation between a property owner's, I always hate to use the word use, impact on a system with how much they're, just like any fee. So yeah, there are some guidelines, but not extremely specific. And as Kevin said, for the permit, they are very specific and prescriptive. Eric, back to your point, and with hindsight, maybe I keep saying this is the 10,000-foot view. Now recognizing the knowledge base of the committee, maybe we should have started around 100 or a couple hundred feet. And this partially goes back to Janice's question as well. We do have a spreadsheet. This is all being done in a nice Excel model I've created that shows, and I did change the slide a few minutes ago, the capital projects that the city is currently has on their plate. And these are right out of the CIP, the 5-year CIP Capital Improvement Program. And so there are at least budgetary estimates for each one of those. We know what the contract amounts are, et cetera, et cetera. We chose not to get to that level of detail today. We could certainly, I guess at the end of this, we'll talk about what do you all want to see next. I was going to get into the expenditures, maybe the 3rd or 4th meeting. Maybe we show that next. And instead of looking at the costs or the supply side of things, look at the cost side of things, but whatever you all would like to see. So we, of course, have those numbers from at least a budgetary standpoint. I think those were the only points I was going to follow up on.
So from what you all are saying, it sounds like you have a stormwater plan already. You have a plan on how we're going to solve the stormwater problem in Rehoboth Beach.
We have, do you mind if I answer that?
Yeah, sure.
There's one right here. All right, there's a plan. We have a model for a stormwater utility, what it would look like.
And so you have data that says this is what it is
absolutely.
before. Well, then how do you not have any data on the lakes? If you don't know what the lake is before, the quality of the water, how will you know what it is afterwards? And I'm talking about all the lakes, not
Yeah.
just Silver Lake, Lake Gerard, et cetera.
Great question. In a way, I might have to kind of lean on Kevin a little bit for this. The utility, again, we have 8 or 9 capital projects here where we are using budgetary estimates to fund, where we're trying to fund a program that we would have a difficult time landing the plane on that if we got so specific on each project. So frankly, I don't remember what the lakes management plan was, whatever the number you gave me. Assumes, we'll have to do this and this in order to reach that endpoint.
Right,
it
but
is
since
not
we've never seen the
prescriptive.
lakes management plan, we don't know what.
Correct. So and I don't think we'll go in that direction at all with this group. And I'm leaving that to the Lakes Management Plan because they're going to come up with, here's the quality it is now. Then they're going to ask us, well, how clean is clean? How clean does Rehoboth want to make it? It doesn't really matter what it used to be, right? We are where we are, and do we want to get it to a certain level? Do you want to drink out of it? you want to swim in it? Do you want to, so that'll come as part of that study. The impact to this group would be that, if the decision over there, the board says, well, we want to make it drinking water, it's going to be a drinking water reservoir, right? Then we're going to have to do huge expenditures on that, which then won't be covered on what we're developing now. So I don't know that to do them both sequentially, I don't know which one would be better to go first, but we're not going to look at cleaning up the cost it would take to clean up Silver Lake or Lake Girard to a specified level. Now, the Lakes Management Plan may ask that, and the board may say, well, here's the level we want to get to. Then we would have to revisit our cost-loaded piece of this.
Well, how will you judge the success of a stormwater plan? What data will you be using? What criteria? The fact that we don't have the guy at the Board of Adjustment last week complaining that he has 18 inches of water in his backyard every time it rains from the parking lot at the Belmore? Or is that going to... what is the measurement of success?
I think flood mitigation is certainly one. I guess we would have to decide, the board would have to decide how clean is clean, right? Is it getting the sediments out? So you put a storm scepter in or something to trap some of the sediments? Or is it improve, do you want to drink out of it?
Well, I don't mean that, Kevin. I mean, the people who are having, and there are many people in Rehoboth Beach who, as you probably well know, who have major flooding in their yards when it rains. It's heavy rains. So when we're going to go to them and ask them to pay higher taxes to improve stormwater runoff, the assumption from them would be, I'm not going to have 18 inches of water in my yard every time it rains, and I'm not going to have, foundation problems and everything else. So how will you determine? Is that a measure of success that we don't have flooding in the town of Rehoboth and on people's property from stormwater?
Right, and that could be an expectation. I think it's probably an unrealistic expectation in that the intensity of the storms. We're not going to design a stormwater infrastructure for Rehoboth Beach that would mitigate a, pick a year, 100-year storm.
Well, I'm talking about heavy rains, this person was.
Correct, and it's around here, it's all about the intensity of it, because the system, if you could get 20 inches if it's spread out over 2 days, because the fact that the system is too small, eventually it'll drain. It's that short, high-intense rain burst that is too big for the inlets and the pipes that then backs it up and it overflows something else. So, we would pick, if we're going to do the Byard Avenue storm sewer as a project, then we would design it to a specific rain event, whether it's a 10-year rain or a 5-year event. But it's not going to get them all, because you're still going to get the 100-year storm once a year, right? I mean, we know that's happening.
I'm aware of that. I mean, I grew up in Miami,
Sure.
and I know in Miami Beach, they've been raising the roads, and no matter how high they raise them, as probably Dave knows, next year, they're too low. Mm-hmm. So we don't want to do it 6 times, and we can learn from other people. But if we don't go into this, I mean, how are we going to explain to our neighbors, well, you're going to be paying so much more in taxes every year for storm water, and it's going to be best for Rehoboth, but meanwhile, the city still lets you use concrete your place, your driveway, instead of putting impervious surfaces. The city, I mean, every case we've had that's come to us has been in compliance with city code, and yet city code allows things on my yard that might cause a great deal of runoff on someone else's. So maybe while we're doing this, the city ought to be looking at those plans. And I know at one point Matt has instituted some changes in building and licensing, but there's more than one, what do you call it, goes into making the plan. And so if we do something, they have to, how do you explain, how do you ask people if they don't see any improvement? And you know about the ocean outfall. People in Rehoboth are not shy about saying what they...
I would tell them to look at the CIP and the projects that we include in this analysis, and they'll have to make a determination if they think that's to their benefit, or maybe it's to their neighbor's benefit, or maybe it's to the city's benefit. But certainly, I mean, you're never going to touch every issue.
Well, but you can fix the city code so that the city requires pervious.
So I have a question, actually dual question, partly for our chairperson. Jay, where, I walk and run on that boardwalk all the time, where are the 5 stormwater outfalls which end up at the boardwalk? That would be, and then I have a question for Dave.
I will send you that study.
That's,
that
okay,
Letitia did,
2018, okay. Because
Lita did,
I mean, am
and-
I blind, are they not that visible? I mean, I'm on.
Well, they're visible. You
They're
can
vis-
walk
I
out
just
and
have
see
never
'em.
noticed them, I must be like a
They're-
little bit.
You'll see them on the beach. They
They're
go
on the
out to
beach.
the ocean. They drain to the
I guess
ocean.
I've seen them. We tend to go to the Oak Avenue Beach in the summer, so I guess I just, okay. And then for Dave, I wanted to ask you, I noticed the upcoming Baltimore and Wilmington Avenue streetscape is listed among these, and that would be like a major CIP type expenditure. Is there some efficiency where those stormwater outfalls in particularly bad condition, that there's going to be some synergy in redoing those 2 streets, and at the same time they're already dug up to replace those stormwater outfalls entirely?
Right, so a couple things on the streetscape piece. What we're looking at is purely the stormwater piece of that. So what you may know or may not know, Wilmington Avenue really only has the sand filters at the end. The other system was taken out 10 or 20 years ago and drains over to Delaware. So there's really not in the first block of Wilmington other than the Delaware sand filter all the way at the end, which drains a very small area. So not a lot there. Baltimore, we're cleaning and videoing the pipes, and in the ocean block of Baltimore Avenue, there's several instances where things have been drilled right through the stormwater pipe. So it reduced the capacity of those pipes. Now, we don't experience any flooding along there, so it really hasn't been an issue, but it's certainly something we would want to take care of while we're doing that.
Right, okay.
So, yeah, whether it's a sewer lateral or an electrical duct bank or whatever, it just comes right through the middle of the pipe. The crazy things you see on these videos.
Well, that's nice to hear, at least on Baltimore
Correct. So what we're
Avenue,
looking at,
right.
right.
It's having some incidental benefit to that, what looks like a $40 to $50 million project. So the timing maybe is better.
Correct. And in all honesty, if that doesn't go forward, the stormwater project on certainly the ocean block of Baltimore has to go forward at some point in time. Right.
Jay, I'm going to suggest, I am looking at the clock now. I know you indicated you were going to hit the gavel at 3 o'clock, so I'm going to suggest maybe I move on at this point.
Yes, please do that. I'm going to hit the gavel at 2:50, 2:55, because we're going to be out of here by 3 every time we have a meeting.
Okay, I did want to follow up real quick, mostly on Jan, there might be a little bit of a misimpression of the model that I've been asked to create. And first I should say I totally understand, you need to show effectiveness as a former student of public policy, totally understood. But what I've been tasked with is a funding mechanism, not or an alternate way to fund all the programs, not necessarily a design of improvements or anything like that. It's really more pure financial. The second, I knew there was something earlier on that I forgot and I couldn't remember, and then Jan tipped me off what I call the T word, tax. And Janice, I may put you on the spot at some point in the future. If I heard your introduction correctly, Fairfax initially tried to fund their stormwater by just tacking on more money onto the tax rate, but then ultimately realized they just weren't keeping up, and so they adopted the utility, which is a fee. And I know at least 1 or 2 of you introduced yourselves as attorneys, so this is really a legal thing. But my understanding of it is there are very real legal distinctions between a tax and a fee. A tax, that's what you pay the police for and things like that, or a fee, it's honestly no different. I thought I had the slide on how I'm sorry, I haven't gotten to it yet. That it's no different than the water bill you pay, the gas bill you pay, things of that nature. It just happens to be for stormwater instead. So I guess real quick as an anecdotal, I did a presentation very similar to this, probably about 5 or 6 years ago now, for Dover City Council. And I had basically the same introductory slides. Rain is natural, stormwater is man-made, these are the impacts. And the mayor, literally in a public meeting, said, this is nothing but a rain tax. And just totally, this is like 5 minutes into an hour presentation. And that was one of the hardest 55 minutes of my life, because it was clear he was going nowhere near this. So I guess I would like to urge you all, try to avoid using the T word if you're talking with your neighbors, things of that nature. What's being proposed here is a fee. It is not the tax. And and then I'll get to the shifting of it here in a moment. So
I'd have to have a little issue. I think that's a distinction without a difference. I think a lot of people will perceive this as an additional tax and might have preferred, given the cost of your consultancy, with all due respect, and this process, might have preferred that we just bumped up property taxes by a certain amount and then bumped up user fees like parking and accommodations tax. So I don't know, maybe other people feel differently. I'm not sure the property owners are going to feel that somehow this is a user fee and not a tax. I think they'll perceive it as a tax. And now that now a lot of the people down here are able to deduct their property taxes if they're, investors and they're renting out their property. Those of us who live here more permanently can't do that anymore now that the standard deduction has been, raised or whatever. Mm-hmm. But I think there's going to be pushback in the sense that people aren't going to. It depends how much we're able to incorporate planting of more trees, building smaller houses versus larger, but otherwise people are going to perceive this as an increase in their tax rate in the city of Rehoboth, is my opinion.
I'm going to use that as a segue then. The next, and I think we really are falling behind here, so we'll have to kind of decide where we want to go, see how, this is kind of the second of three main parts of the presentation. So to Suzanne's point, and I should also say, I've actually written reports on ways to fund stormwater programs, and what I tried to do is I just looked at like the 7 or 8 most common ways and literally picked the most typical advantage and disadvantage, and was just intending to kind of go through this quickly. I have zero problem, and honestly, for for the committee to show that they did their due diligence, maybe we do spend more time on each of these. I'm certainly not trying to diminish their need. But essentially, Rehoboth right now is going the pay-as-you-go. The projects in the CIP, annually, the money that is spent just gets rolled up into the budget in any given year. The advantages of that, basically, little or no interest expenses, and if you do need to have some major purchase, you reserve debt capacity for those purchases. The problem is, sooner or later you may run into a capital project that you really can't fund with current revenues, even if you factor it out over a number of years, what I call the lumpiness factor. If you had some multi-million-dollar expenditure, that can be a little bit difficult to absorb in a budget in any given year. The next, often used hand in hand, is incurring debt. Kevin, I'm not really aware of any major debt that's being incurred for the stormwater improvements.
Not at this point. Yeah.
Okay, but certainly some cities do that, and there are advantages to doing that. Adds financial stability, enables you to undertake projects you wouldn't otherwise be able to undertake. The problem is, of course, now you're starting to pay interest. You can also encumber future city council members, commissioners, as you incur that debt. You could kind of tie their hands a little bit. And you, of course, need to exercise prudence. It's real easy to say, oh, really, that's only going to cost us X dollars, and you spread it out over to just like any of us with our credit cards. You've got to keep close track of what you're spending. The capitalization development impact fees, that really isn't too applicable for Rehoboth, as Kevin had on one of his slides. Rehoboth is by and large built out. If you have a redevelopment project, you could potentially extract a development impact fees. They are used, very common, schools a lot of times, but they're often used really more to fund the major, like a new wastewater treatment plant or something like that. It's a little bit difficult to apply it to upsizing a 24-inch pipe to a 36-inch pipe or something of that nature. And again, Rehoboth is by and large built out, so I think the opportunities there would not be abundant. There are grant and loan programs. I guess, Kevin, one of the things you didn't introduce, that part of my time, honestly, is being paid for by a DENREC grant. I worked with Evan to secure that. There are funds out there, nonprofits, oftentimes. And of course, right now with the, what's the BIL, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, as Kevin will tell you, I think he and I were on the same webinar just a week or two back. DENREC is kind of awash in money right now. But sooner or later, that spigot will run dry, and the problem with grants and loans, you can't rely on them necessarily. They're great when you get them, but if you rely on them and you don't, you know, you're kind of stuck. The state does have a very rigorous revolving loan fund. Essentially, they have enough money that if they loan, and I know, Kevin, you've taken advantage of these before for some of your other, not stormwater, some of your other improvements, at usually a nominal interest rate, and they have enough loans at any given time that the program basically pays for itself. In other words, the interest payments keep the program going, and they're able, why they call them revolving loans. But again, a fairly competitive process, and unfortunately, I did put it on here, they're really more for water sewer work. I've sometimes called stormwater as kind of that third wheel a little bit. The water and sewer seems to get most of the emphasis, but there are, you know, there are opportunities out there. And then community-based public-private partnerships. This gets really interesting. One of my clients is actually a township in Pennsylvania, kind of privatized, if you will, part of their permit requirements where they are paying a third party to design, construct, and maintain long-term some of these stormwater BMPs on ag land, and the pollutant load reduction is applied as a credit on this township's permit, commonly called an offset program. Very, very interesting, and there are places, if you clearly a very engaged community, Prince George's County, which has, of course, needs probably 100 times what Rehoboth has, basically privatized their entire countywide permit compliance with it, millions of dollars each year to a third party. So I find it personally, again, kind of that public policy thing, very interesting. Would it work in Rehoboth? You know, is there really enough of a need? That would be questionable. You also get into, anytime you get into a privatization issues, you do lose control. Depending on how the contract's written. Again, a very interesting topic, and one we could keep exploring a little bit more. And then that, of course, brings us back to the purpose of the task force, the fee-based programs. In a broad sense, a nutshell, the acronym SAFE was penned by somebody, one gentleman named Frank Piorco many, many years ago at DENREC. It's stable, it's adequate, it's flexible, and then the big word, it's equitable. And that is something I'm definitely going to keep talking about often. It recognizes that you do have growing stormwater needs, and it basically will separate your stormwater expenditures from other competing interests. If you're the city manager and you need to buy a new police car, or you need to put in the storm sewer, which are you going to do? It eliminates those types of conversations. We already talked a moment ago, Suzanne, I believe is your point, absolutely could be potential opposition from residents. I know there was at least one business owner, Bob, I think that was you on the committee, thank you. And this is one of the handful of really key points I wanted to make, a conversation, Frank, it might have been your point of what are we going to ask the utility to fund. Again, we've presented the whole laundry list of things here, and if that comes up to a fee that you all believe is just not realistic, the residents won't accept it, then we're going to have to say, all right, we'll fund these, but we won't necessarily fund these. Those are the tough decisions. It'll be, third or fourth meeting. But one thing you all may want to start thinking about even now is, with this utility, would it be new revenue, or is it just changing the revenue stream that you have now? In other words, people like Commissioner LaGreen may need to come up with a tax decrease to offset the increase that people are seeing in fees. Now we're getting really into the weeds, but these are the conversations that we'll certainly have to have at some point. And the other thing we want to make sure it's not burdensome to any municipality. I believe it might have been Mary's question, if who's the point person for the stormwater stuff? In a way, that's Kevin's 5%, I guess. If we made this program so burdensome to manage, and they had to hire somebody, or transfer somebody who's now spending 50% of his or her time, well, maybe that's not the most effective way to do it. So you need to really kind of strike that balance between administrative simplicity and kind of that equity fairness thing, that continuum. We'll have to talk about a lot. There it is. I knew it was on here somewhere. It's a stormwater fee, not a tax. Although I recognize, Suzanne, I'm not disagreeing with you at all. People are just going to perceive it. It's coming out of their pocket. And whether they understand the distinction or not remains to be seen. The attorneys in the room could help me with this a little bit. I've always heard it referred to as the rational nexus test. I think I mentioned earlier that DENREC, what little their regulations say about utilities, they do mention that there needs to be a reasonable correlation between a property owner's impact on the system and what their fee is. That's commonly called the rational nexus. Just like you're not going to pay a water bill that's for twice the water you actually use, you have a meter that will meter it. There needs to be some sort of a defendable nexus between that cost and what any individual property is paying. Extremely important. Roughly 25% of utilities nationwide are challenged legally. More often than not, over that one issue is that the entity failed. Well, I'll get to Lewis in a moment. I have another slide here. So here's where I thought I had this earlier, but so with water and wastewater, the water, even though your wastewater bill is usually based on your water bill, but there's a meter, very easy to measure. You use X gallons or X cubic feet a month, a quarter, whatever, times whatever the rate is, and there's your bill. Electricity is typically the same way. We all have the meters in our basements or what have you that can measure electricity. But the problem with stormwater is there's no practical way to put a meter or anything on how stormwater is leaving property. It could leave in multiple directions. It could be leaving as sheet flow. Very difficult to do. So what is typically done, I think Kevin alluded to this earlier, impervious surface is typically used as what I call a proxy, a surrogate, if you will. There are ways now, I mentioned the GIS systems earlier, with computerized mapping that's very accurate. It can spit out databases very quickly and easily that we have determined how many square feet of impervious surface there is in Rehoboth Beach. And we've done that, now I'm getting ahead of myself, we've done that also looking at what is that land use, how big is the property, et cetera, and we've started sifting through, okay, well, if we had a rate of this amount, how much would it cost this property, how much would it cost that property, things of that nature. That will certainly be, maybe that's the next meeting, or certainly no later than the third meeting, as we've spent a great deal of time and effort looking at everything at that level. So the basics of utility, I've mentioned this before, there needs to be a direct correlation between that imperviousness and the impact. It needs to be very equitable. If you have a property that's twice the imperviousness of the next door neighbor, that property probably should be paying twice a bill, or at least somewhere in that range. It needs to be legally defendable. I already mentioned how many of these are challenged in court and not administratively burdensome. So what is typically done, another distinction to draw now would be between residential and non-residential properties. I don't have the exact numbers off the top of my head, but in a typical municipality, roughly 3/4 of the properties are residential, but non-residential properties make up roughly 3/4 of the impervious surface. Certainly go to malls, hotels with large parking areas, right. So what will often be done is it's worth the time and effort to measure that impervious surface for a commercial property because you don't have that many of them and they make up a large percentage of the total imperviousness. But back to being administratively burdensome, to keep measuring the imperviousness of every residential property, because there are so many of them, and even cumulatively, they tend to be fairly small. Plus, people put additions on their house. They put a new detached garage in the backyard, a shed, things of that nature. So you have constant updates you need to be doing. So what is often done with residential is they would be grouped by tiers. You group them in like amounts based on just a spatial analysis of you've got the large houses on the one end, the smaller houses on another. And believe it or not, they usually kind of break out somewhat logically into these tiers. So again, now I'll be more than, in fact, this will be part of a future presentation of how we can break the city down into like 3 tiers, 4 tiers, what makes sense. There is another way to do it, where, again, back to the way the mapping keeps improving. The utilities, I believe Tacoma Park was like mid-90s, or it goes back quite a ways if I recall correctly. The mapping technology keeps improving like everything else technology-wise, and there's another process that will look at residential and non-residential on more of an equal basis. But again, these will be the conversations of, is it worth going to that level? Does it become burdensome to the city to track building permits each year and update the database, et cetera, et cetera? So that's ultimately where this will go. What do we have next? So I think I more or less kind of went over this. I guess I've veered a little bit from my own presentation. So the tiering of properties is what is typically called an equivalent residential or equivalent runoff unit. And I have a pictorial slide in a moment that'll probably be a little bit easier. I mentioned the stormwater billing unit. Another way some people have done this is what I'm calling an intensity of development factor, where you look not so much at just the imperviousness, but the percent of imperviousness under the thought that a property that is, say, 90% impervious, pretty safe assumption it's all going to drain off into a street, into a storm sewer, something like that. But if one's only 40 or 50% impervious, it might percolate back into the ground. Some of it might. So it gets pretty confusing, and honestly, I'm not a huge fan of this because it does get confusing to try to explain to people. But if that's the direction the committee wants to go, and that's certainly something we could look at very closely. And then there are other hybrid approaches. Honestly, I don't think there are any two utilities in the country that are absolutely identical. They all have their own little way of doing things. So I think this is real for Rehoboth. We determined roughly 3,000 square feet is kind of the sweet spot, if you will, the median, and we also look at the average and the median of what the average impervious surface is in a residential property, and came up with around 3,000 square feet. So with this ERU concept, that would be one ERU, and just kind of made this up. You have a Wawa or whatever that say is 10 times that. So if you have an ERU rate of $1 a month or whatever, the house is paying $1, but that commercial entity is paying 10. So a very easy ratio on how that works. So this gets into that equity thing, because theoretically that commercial property is 10 times the impact on the system.
But what if the commercial parking lot is totally impervious?
Excellent question.
As in many locations in this country, they're
Right.
required to be.
So that we'll get to. It's a very extremely good question. Credits. And I heard somebody, and I don't recall who it was earlier, talked about incentivizing in the context of trees, and I believe there are some other people that expressed that desire. And to Kevin's point, this is where kind of where this whole thing started, is the impervious surface analysis that we helped the city with some years back. How can the city incentivize people to kind of do the right thing? Well, right now, I think that's kind of, not real easy. But if people are paying $2, $3, $4, whatever dollars a month on a stormwater bill that could be knocked off by 25% or 50% by doing certain things, particularly commercial entities, that gets to be a different conversation. So, and again, this is still at 10,000 feet, so we will absolutely get into that lower level of what would credits look like. So I alluded a moment ago that with refined billing systems, I've heard them call multiple things. I just call it a stormwater billing unit. We can call it anything we want, where you kind of put residential and non-residential on an equal basis. These numbers are frankly really kind of made up. But let's say you set your stormwater billing unit at 250 square feet. Well, that same property that has 3,000, that would then be 12 stormwater billing units. And that same Wawa or whatever would then be 120 stormwater billing units. So it's just kind of a different way. It does essentially the same thing, just a different way to slice it. But it does avoid that tiering, and I'll certainly be more than happy to explain that because that is a pretty important concept. I'm not sure we'll have time today, but again, another way to do it. And then, as I mentioned, this intensity of development factor would kind of take the lot area and its percent of imperviousness or a runoff factor into account, as it still kind of creates the same general formula. One of the reasons I'm not real fond of this is the other thing, and I don't think I mentioned earlier. If this program is going to be implemented, I've always heard it's called like the 30-second rule. If you can't explain what you're trying to do in 30 seconds, you're never going to. And if you need to spend 5 minutes explaining to a property owner how this formula was developed and what their fee is going to be, it's a losing proposition. So the other part of the keep it simple kind of a thing is make it simple to explain as well. But again, I will say, if this is the direction, and I did have a client some years back it was actually out in Wyoming, where they did not have extremely dense properties. Most of the properties were very large, and they really wanted to have the size of the property included into it. So we came up with a formula for them and went with it. So try to wrap it up pretty quickly here. I think I can do that. So there's roughly, this is a stormwater utility survey. I'm not sure why Western Kentucky University has been doing this every other year, but they've been doing it for probably since the 2000s. They've figured there are about 1,800 stormwater utilities throughout the country. 41 states have at least one of them. Minnesota, I believe, is the leader at 204. Florida's obviously a very large region, the Pacific Northwest. And they've found, believe it or not, there's one that only has 88 people. Some little tiny village in Florida, I believe, implemented a utility. Average population, 66,000. I believe Los Angeles is probably the biggest. I don't know what their population is now, 3, 4, 5 million. Chicago might have one. So they're far from uncommon, but not the most common thing in Delaware. Wilmington enacted theirs probably in the mid-2000s, if I recall correctly. I follow up to this. Dover, I mentioned that a moment ago. They're currently investigating it. It's been going on for years. I don't know if they're ever really going to implement it or not. Newcastle County, about that same time period, the late 2000s, they started looking into it. They paid an enormous amount of money to have an impervious cover GIS layer developed. The whole report, frankly, did kind of the work that I'm doing for you all right now, and it just never really made it over the finish line. Anecdotally, I remember that was when one Chris Coons was actually the county executive. I remember him coming to the first task force meeting and talking, we really want to get this done. And of course, we all know where he went on to, and I think that was part of the reason it just kind of lost its legs. But utilities, there was a task force that was created. I was fortunate enough to actually have worked with DENREC on that back in the mid-2000s. You might recall there were 2 or 3 hurricanes that hit Delaware within the matter of a few years. And really uncovered the need for better surface water management, led to a lot of regulatory changes, but it was one of the outcomes of Governor Minter's task force is a recommendation to go ahead and get utilities implemented. So I'll try to go through this quickly. Wilmington, you can see they have this tiered system. They have a pretty pricey system, anywhere from $495 to $2178 a month. I will say Wilmington has what's commonly called a combined sewer system. Rehoboth does not. In fact, Wilmington is the only city in the state that does, where this goes back literally decades, where their storm and their sanitary sewer was in the same system, the same pipes. Has many problems associated with it, as you would expect. Sewer overflows, so they have problems that, again, unfortunately, Rehoboth does not have to deal with, but that's probably one of the reasons why their rate is quite high. Lewis, Kevin was already pretty blunt a little while ago. I did this exact same project for them, probably 2008, 2009, and they pretty much ignored it. They decided we'll go with $5 a month residential, $10 a month for commercial, $20 for industrial. And I've told them multiple times, although it's been quite a few years, if you ever get sued, you're going to lose, because they have that rational nexus. There is no direct correlation between, you could have an industrial property that's 100 times the size of a residential, let alone residential that multiple sizes within their own sphere, but that's how they chose to do it, and that's it. And disclosure, I'm a resident of the city of Newark. I pay a stormwater utility fee. They have, I believe it is 4 tiers. Their fee is what I consider, I think I'm in the second of the 4 tiers. I have a relatively small house in an older part of the city. It's somewhere around $375 a month or something thereabouts. They actually developed kind of what I would call the hybrid system, that they tiered the residential and they applied these intensity of development factors to the commercial. So what they do is they take a 10-acre commercial site and apply a like 0.9, 0.85, whatever the ratio might be, to these various uses. So they are not measuring the commercial on a one-by-one basis. I'm not really sure why they did it that way, but that's, again, no two utilities are necessarily the same. They reached their decision and moved on. I'm getting my 5-minute warning here, so, which is actually great timing. So this is how, working with Kevin, we kind of thought we would outline everything with the May meeting. Again, I've put all this in a pretty complicated, but I think I can go through it pretty well. Excel-based model, demonstrate what a fee might look like. For the June meeting, we were going to start to get into things like the credits. Property exemptions, Kevin mentioned the state. Think about one of the, what is your probably most impervious surface in Rehoboth?
Roads.
Roads, of course. A lot of them are owned by the state. You're going to go to DENREC and ask them to pay a bill? It's a rhetorical question. And for that matter, is the city going to write a bill to itself? As far as I know, the city of Newark literally transfers money from one fund to the other for their roadways. And then there were some, and I'm already kind of thinking maybe we do the July meeting in May. There were multiple questions here today on what the city's expenditures look like. Maybe we ought to go ahead and tee that one up next. Again, it's the task force will do what you need us to do. So that's how we kind of laid it out. Jay, your pleasure, what you would like to do at this point?
If you'll tell us how you want the agenda, I'll get with Kevin and we'll get support documents ready to go, and we'll be able to follow along and make notes as we go and be a lot more, be well informed.
So one of the things I did also do, I guess a little bit of a miscommunication with Kevin and myself, he asked me to put together some homework assignments for you all. I did send, it's just a single page sheet, and it's on my computer. It had links to the state code if you all want to read that. It had links to 3 or 4 different programs. I'm sorry, Tacoma Park and Fairfax were not among them, but just Google it and you'll find more hits than you could do anything with. A couple of EPA documents, and then also the web pages where Wilmington, Newark, and Lewis have their stormwater programs described. I guess maybe after in the next few days or whatever, if you want to distribute that. And again, you all clearly, I think there's probably been a lot of homework already done before you even showed up today. But I guess I'm going to suggest maybe we go ahead and do the expenditures next meeting. And clearly there was a lot of interest in what the city is spending money on. Again, a lot of assumptions being made. Might be a little bit premature to be talking about which ones should be included.
We can get the budget. If we'll get Kevin's matrix, we'll be able to discuss that, and and everybody can be up to speed, and that can be distributed before the meeting, and we can get ready.
Sounds
Frank.
good.
Yeah, I have a question probably for you, Jay, and possibly for Kevin. It's a macro question as far as the scope of this committee. I'm on another task force that we were all under a very different impression about what our role was going to be and what we were going to accomplish, as opposed to what the people who had actually enshrined the commission had for us. So there were many members were kind of felt disenfranchised or disinterested in it. So could somebody explain to me what the scope of this committee is? Are we going to be talking about trees? Are we going to be addressing what Jan was talking about, water in people's backyards? Or is this primarily based on budgetary concerns and raising money for projects that are otherwise determined? In other words, are those determinations going to be part of this committee, or is that beyond the scope of this committee? So I'm looking for what the role of this committee is in the big picture.
This is a feasibility committee. We're going to decide if we want to go forward with a particular type of funding, If we want to go, if we don't want to go forward with the funding, we'll decide that. If we want to do impervious surface, we're free to talk about that. We may decide, Jan's brought this up, we have a lakes management fund, we have a lakes management headwind that's gonna cost all kinds of money. And do we wanna wait and get more information on that? Or do we think it's pertinent to go right ahead and start thinking about funding this committee or this utility? And a lot of it, I'm gonna ask Janice to talk to us about it as we get further along. How do we wanna go about doing this? Obviously, Dave thinks that it's impervious surface is probably the best, easiest, most efficient, and most expedient. And I think Fairfax is going to that. Is that correct?
Correct.
And they funded with tax, with a mill levy, up until it's July you start, right? Next July?
Correct.
So there are ways to fund, and we just need to decide how we're gonna do it. Or not at all, or not at all. We may decide not at all. I don't think we will, because we gotta get money. We're looking at Basin 40 on our CIP, which Letitia will be happy to know about, and some other project. And it's costing us money to do what we did on Delaware. It's costing, a lot of the things that we're doing now is costing. And it's coming out of our general fund right now. And we need to decide if we want to keep doing that. I think we'll decide that we do want to set up a funding mechanism of some kind. And I think it'll be a utility. And I was talking to Janice, you can do a lot of things with a utility that you can't do with just pulling money out of the general fund, which is what we're doing now. And I haven't answered your question, but maybe I can give you, maybe you'll have a little, I don't know what we want to do.
Well,
You
I'm
will
wondering
know.
is this committee going to make recommendations to the mayor and commissioners that we put storm scepters in, for instance, or that we
Probably
do a
not.
study on what lake quality is and other issues that I've heard bannered around here that seem to have nothing to do with what this committee has actually been formed for, which is for funding of creating a funding apparatus.
Yeah, and you may not, this committee is a committee of stakeholders.
Right.
And they may not want to go forward with that. I think they will. But your question is very pertinent. It's a great question. Jan asked about a similar topic.
Well,
Yeah,
the problem, I think, is I see the committee as a way of funding stormwater projects. That's what I understood this was for. The problem is, maybe it's my years as a lobbyist, you have to sell this to the people who live in Rehoboth. And if you're going to say, I also need to sell it to myself, how do we measure success? Is measuring success getting a tax in or a fee, whatever you want to call it? Or is measuring success be able to show that, the lake is cleaner, the roads are cleaner, nobody's backyard is flooding? If I go to sell to Mr. Fry on how much this is, going to cost him every month, and he still has 18 inches of water because the Belmore parking lot is running, all the water's running in, that's not going to make him enthusiastic. And the residents of the city already turned down, the ocean outfall thing from Sussex County. People feel very strongly about things here, so there has to be, it's a very affluent community. I don't doubt if there's anybody in Rehoboth that couldn't afford to pay $5 more a month. But they have to have a reason for doing it, and they have to know it's going to have a positive impact on the community overall. And if the people who use the lakes and live around the lakes see, it's not looking good, or the people who are getting flooded are still being flooded, then they're going to wonder and they're going to complain, and that's going to impact the people who are elected and who will pass this, because it's going to be us that's going to pass it. So you have to have a rational reason, and you have to be able to solve a problem and to be able to explain it in terms that people can understand.
Well, this is my question. This is my basic confusion here, is that it seems the cart before the horse. We're asking to create a funding mechanism for what?
For that list of projects you're
For
going to
that
see
list of projects.
next month.
Yeah, I don't
Okay.
think, maybe Kevin, you can describe to us the crumbling you know, the crumbling state in which you're finding a lot of these stormwater sewers, and that alone, I mean, I think people are concerned about that. Aren't roads buckling? Aren't we having issues beyond just short-term flooding at this point already?
Certainly.
Yeah, so I don't think we need a justification that.
No, I don't think we need
complex
justification.
as that
except-
necessarily.
I'm just curious as to the scope of this, whether we're talking about new projects beyond preparing what,
It was not the intent of this committee to develop a projects list.
okay.
That's the job of the, that's the job of the city.
Succinct answer to my question.
Yeah.
If I can try and answer a couple questions at once.
Uh-huh.
Way I see it, it's that the city is looking for a way to come up with a dedicated funding source to address a set of problems. And the way to sell doing it certain ways is if you leave it as a tax, it's part of the general fund, and it may get funded and it may not to the levels that are sufficient. If it becomes a fee, the way we sold it in Tacoma Park was you're expanding the base of people who pay for it, because there are entities that don't pay taxes that pay fees, and you structure it so that the greatest impact has the greatest cost. And therefore, it'll reduce the burden on the people who are paying the jumping around taxes now.
I'm going to call a halt to the discussion, and I'm going to adjourn the meeting. And the next meeting is the 3rd of May, same time, same station. And we will we'll continue to discuss the topics. And I'll send out some references and maybe some homework. And I thank everybody.
Thank you.
And I'm really proud of everybody. I'm impressed. This has gone very well.
Chris was the only one dozing in the back.
You stayed the course.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin, as always.
Oh, yeah, good to see you. Talk to